All right, everybody, welcome in to the Go 24/7 podcast. I am Glenn West. That is Sonny Ship. We are SEC play is here, guys. We are just a couple days away now, a couple hours away from LSU opening up its conference schedule with Florida here in Death Valley. It'll be a Saturday night in Death Valley, a 6:30 kickoff. So there'll be plenty of time for fans to get out there and to drink plenty of liquid courage before this game and have a good old time before what I think we expect to be a pretty electric atmosphere in Tiger Stadium, and certainly really excited about that. Before we get into everything today, we just ask that if you're on YouTube or if you're watching, to please hit that subscribe button, leave us a real review. If you're listening in your podcast forms, also hit a rating and a subscription would be great. Always helps us out as we try to grow this thing and get it out to as many LSU fans as possible. So with that, Sonny, how are we feeling about this weekend? What's the vibe here as you're getting as we get closer to LSU Florida, and just maybe your overarching theme of what you want to see from this group this weekend?
Well, I think it's just excitement. Excitement's in the air. The home opener, Florida. People have kind of had Florida, South Carolina. Those games have kind of been circled on the calendar for a little bit now, looking at the schedule and stuff. And I think, uh, I think probably most fans thought they had a feel for what this LSU team was after the Clemson game. Then Louisiana Tech throws a little threw a little water on that fire just a little bit. So I think they're just anxious to see, like, okay, what are we going to see Saturday? Are
Yeah.
we going to see a team that has so much offensive firepower but struggles to move the ball, or are they going to see an offense that goes out and just really just kind of lights things up a little bit? I think we know what we have on defense, but the big question mark is going to be on offense. Got a little bit of news yesterday with Braylon Moore. Obviously, he's practiced Tuesday and Wednesday, so that's big for the offensive line from a communication standpoint. But just I guess just the overall feel from what you kind of are picking up around Baton Rouge and just around South Louisiana is they're ready to just get this game going and get it underway.
Yeah, I'm right there with them. I think this is going to be a huge telltale sign for this team. I think kind of going into this season, I think we had all pegged. Obviously, Clemson is one of the major games that LSU needed to get through and come out on top with. But I honestly had Florida as one of my trickier SEC games for this team, just on because of where it is on the schedule and just how easy or how quickly was it going to take for this defense and offense to kind of start gelling quickly together. And I think we've seen that on the defensive side of the ball. We can certainly talk about that a little later, but we have to focus on the offense, I think, first here. And certainly last week was not the kind of home opener that group was looking for. I think they certainly would tell you, and we touched on this a little bit after the game, but just they did not execute the way that they needed to. Coach Brian Kelly obviously called out the coaching staff pretty heavily in his post game comments there, and so this is going to be a big weekend to see just kind of what their response is. And I think that has to start at the top. I think it has to start with Joe Sloan and Garrett Nussmeier. I think you're going to see a real dedicated game plan this weekend against the Gators. I think Nussmeier, just in talking with him on Wednesday or Tuesday, I should say, during player interviews, he understands that performance that he had last Saturday can't be the norm for him, and he has to play much better. He has to hit those receivers on those big routes that they had opened up for him, but he was missing. I mean, the very first play, our very first deep throw touchdown that was intercepted is a very good example of that, and that was a play that he was asked about, and he just chopped it up to really bad decision, really bad throw, really bad mechanics, really bad everything, and something he has to learn from. And so I think for me, one of the things I'm looking for this offense is obviously you want to see the run game continue to evolve and stretch in different creative ways. But for me, it's going to be much more centered on the passing game and just how LSU's able to open up the passing game this weekend. And I think there are some ways that they can go about doing that. I think it's going to be a big weekend for guys like Nick Anderson and Chris Hilton in particular. We kind of know what I think this offense has with Barryon Brown and Xavier Thomas and Aaron Anderson. Those have been kind of your core three guys so far through two games. But we came into the season knowing that those guys and Nick Anderson and Chris Hilton would have to play a serious role. And I think we started to get little glimpses of it last weekend with Anderson in particular with his touchdown catch. But I really want to see LSU try to get vertical in this game. I think a big part of this is going to be obviously what the injury situation is with Braylon Moore in particular, just to catch people up. Braylon Moore and Trey'Dez Green have both been listed as questionable for this game on Saturday. Brian Kelly has poured some optimism, I think, on Braylon Moore over the last couple days. I think I feel better maybe about him playing in this game than I do about Trey'Dez at this point in time. But if they're able to get anything out of Braylon Moore, even if it's an 80% of Braylon Moore this weekend or a 75% of Braylon Moore, I think you see him play, and I think you see him try to give it a go. And I think that they try to get him out there for this SEC opener with the idea here that you've got Southeastern coming up and you maybe got some extra time, some extra room there to maybe continue to heal that ankle and whatever might be bothering him. So I think if he can go, they're going to try to get him out there for as many reps as possible. And that should, I think, help this offense. Certainly, you saw his impact and what that could be in the Clemson game. But I really think that for me, offensively, they have to be more dialed in the passing game. They have to find ways to get those guys the ball and let those playmakers go make plays. I have a feeling it's going to be a similar kind of game plan to what we saw at Clemson. I think Florida is a tricky defense. I think they have some guys that are going to be able to get into the backfield on LSU and maybe cause some havoc back there. So getting the ball out quickly, and really, I think the one area that I think you saw USF last week have some success with Florida was in that passing game where they threw for 263 yards, but 201 of them came after the catch, on yards after the catch. And I think that's going to be something else you tries to lean into here with some of their passing weapons and certainly guys like Barryon Brown and all the speedy guys that they have in this offense that are very capable. Aaron Anderson, of course, that are capable of making plays after the catch. I think that's going to be a huge, huge part of what LSU tries to do this weekend. Anything offensively that you think is going to be really important for LSU to key in on? I know I maybe rambled on a lot there, but just what are maybe some of your thoughts offensively of how this group can get going?
This is all on Joe Sloan.
Yeah,
This is all on Joe Sloan this week because you've got vertical weapons. You've got so much speed and so many vertical weapons that you can't even get them all on the field at the same time. And you have shown a yeah, I don't know if it's an inability to push the ball down the field or an unwillingness to push the ball down the field, a combination of both. But you've got to get that fixed. You've got to get that fixed. I mean, by the time you hit Florida, you are a quarter of the way through your regular season. If it takes you a quarter of the regular season to dial in into what is supposed to be the strength of your offense, that's a problem.
yeah,
That's a problem. It should not take a quarter of the season to get to that point. And I realize that they put such an emphasis on running the football better, but you can't rob Peter to pay Paul.
yeah,
You've got to find a way to pay everybody. And if you can't find a way to pay everybody, well, then you got to ask yourself, you got to say, okay, we're paying $2 million a year right here, for, yeah, and not even that, but when you consider co-OCs, you're probably up to about
yeah,
$3 million a year. And so you absolutely, it's one thing if you're just not connecting on those balls, but it's totally another when you're not even throwing.
yeah,
And so I think that is the biggest thing that needs to come out of this week. We can harp on running the football as much as you want, but if LSU is going to realize its potential this year. It's going to be a combination from running the football, but cashing in on those big play threats that
Yeah.
you have in the receiving game. That is what this offense has been built around. You've got a Heisman Trophy, a Heisman Trophy campaigning quarterback. You've got an offensive line that Brian Kelly felt really good about going into the season. All you talked about was the receivers that you have, and so you have to try to take advantage of them. It's one thing, like I said, it's one thing if you're not hitting them, but you got to try them, man. You
Yeah.
got to try it. You got to push that defense back, and you know, stop. I guess stop focusing so much on what the opponent wants to give you and focus more on what your strengths are.
Yeah.
Now I'm not saying if you want to run the ball that you run into a 9-man box come hell or high water, but you've got to hone in on your strengths. And I think that I think that this is the week. This is the week to do that.
Yeah.
This is the week that you absolutely have to do that. Is you've got to go vertical. You've got to push the ball more vertically down the field. You push the ball more vertically down the field. You have some success. You're going to push the defense back. You're going to open up the run game. You're going to open up the underneath passing game to where you can get the ball to Aaron Anderson, Xavier Thomas, Nick Anderson, Bauer Sharp, etc., and allow them to have some space to be able to make some of those plays that we saw South Florida make. You know, I'm with you. I said that, entering the season, I said that, that I thought Florida could be the biggest game of the season if LSU lost that opener to Clemson. However, after looking at Florida, especially last week against South Florida, I think you and I would both say that, okay, well, maybe Florida's not exactly, what we thought that they were going to be coming into the season. I think it's still a little too early to say that, though. I
Yeah.
think LSU has to approach this that, look, this is Florida. It's a series that's tied 34 wins each. They tied three times. LSU went down to the swamp last year thinking they were going to win that game. You had an injured DJ Lagway. And what happens? LSU pulls up lame and they lose 27-16, probably, outside of Alabama. But although Texas A&M was a pretty debilitating loss too. But, I think that Florida game, when you look at it, that's the one that you look at and you said, okay, we really need this one right here. We really need to snap this streak. And they went down to the swamp, and Florida gave them a rude awakening, and gave them that loss. And so this is a series that is always it's not a quote unquote rival, but when you look at LSU, a school that doesn't really have a contested rival on an annual basis. The Florida game, the Auburn game, the Alabama game, those are games that just have always meant a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that you'll see with the crowd, the atmosphere, the setting on Saturday night, that's how the fan base feels.
Yeah.
And so from an LSU perspective, you just go in there and you just take care of your business. You just go in there, you take care of business, but we've got to start we've got to start utilizing the tools that we have in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And I
I
and I
think
feel like that's the biggest one.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I to your point about the vertical offense and just how that can open up the rest of things. Like I think Florida saw last week against Louisiana Tech, and I think their strength as a defense is going to be to load that box. Like they're going to test LSU in that way. Brian Kelly talked a lot about the 3-3 box that LSU faced against Louisiana Tech. Wouldn't be a bit surprised if Florida tries to roll that out. And it's the perfect scheme to go deep, right? I mean, it's the perfect scheme to open things up for this offense from a vertical passing game perspective. But they've got to take those chances. Nussmeier's got to be hitting his throws. Nick Anderson, Chris Hilton, I think, are two guys that you want to see step up in those areas. But certainly, Barryon Brown has that potential. Aaron Anderson has that potential to go deep. Xavier Thomas, I think, is more kind of your underneath route guy, but I think he's somebody that can certainly open things up for your offense as well. So I think this passing offense and just getting going, like you mentioned, is going to be a massive, massive thing. The thing that I think is going to be really important and I think is interesting and why you mentioned last year's Florida game is the red zone offense. Last year, LSU was able to get the ball moving on Florida, but they just were not able to convert on scoring opportunities. I think I looked it up. I think they had 5 trips to the red zone last year, and I think they walked away with 1 touchdown and a bunch of field goals. Like
Free throw line.
they have to be able to score when they get inside the 20, and that's been honestly that's been an issue for this first couple weeks too. Like they have had I went back and charted all their red zone opportunities. They've had 8 so far in the 2025 season. They've resulted in 4 touchdowns, 3 field goals, and the 1 turnover there in the Clemson game on Chris Hilton's fumble. That that has to improve. The efficiency on the offense and the red zone scoring on the offense has to improve. It's something that Brian Kelly talked a lot about this week and just kind of leading up to this game. And honestly, that's where you miss a guy like Trades Green. A lot of their targets so far in the red zone have gone to Green. But I think a lot of the targets that they've gone to have been really the same play. It's just been lobbing it up to him and seeing if he can go make a play. That to me is not really the best way I think to utilize him in the red zone. I think there's many different ways other than lobbing it up to him and seeing if he can go make a catch on a 5'11", 6 foot corner. And I think there's going to be ways in which if he doesn't play, LSU is going to have to prove that when they get into those situations that they can run the football and that they can open things up in passing situations when the field shortens. Like that's where I think a guy like Nick Anderson can come into play, where Bauer Sharp can come into play. I'll be interested to see how Harlan Berry's role maybe increases after his nice start last week against Louisiana Tech and the big run that he was able to pull off. So I think there's a lot of different ways in which LSU can utilize its weapons, but to your point, it's going to be on Joe Sloan, it's going to be on Garrett Nussmeier, it's going to be on this entire unit 1 to 11 to figure that out and to be a much more efficient offense this weekend against the Gators. I
Well,
do,
and it's
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
for
I'm
it.
sorry.
No, go for
No,
it.
what I was just going to say is that you have to help your offense out too.
Yeah,
The hardest place on the field to move the ball is in the red zone.
yeah,
You know, so how do you help yourself? How do you help your offense out from that? Okay, let's not get into the red zone. How do we not get into the red zone but still score? We just run through the red zone.
yeah.
You know, and so
Hit on some big
I,
plays.
I'm a big proponent, and you got to have the Johnnies and the Joes. You got to have the guys that make plays, but you also have to allow them, give them opportunities to make those plays. And I think that that's look, first play of the game against Florida. If Garrett Nussmeyer came out, rolled to the right, heaved the ball 55 yards down the field, and it was intercepted, I would not be disappointed.
Yeah,
You know,
just show them
I
that
would
you're.
not be disappointed just from the standpoint of we're at least trying.
Yeah,
We're at least trying, and so I think that, and that's why I put a lot of the onus when I started off when I put it on when I said with Joe Sloan, because I put a lot of this onus on him in that you've got to come out in this game right here and you saw what Louisiana Tech did to you last week. You may not have expected it, okay, but you saw what they did to you last week. Florida saw what they did to you last week. Everybody saw what they did to you last week. Not being able to move the ball against that same scheme and that same schematic tendencies 2 weeks in a row is absolutely inexcusable at this level.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely inexcusable. Not if you want to be one of the highest paid coordinators in college football.
Sure.
You've got to come up with some solutions. You've got to come up with some options. And, too much going back to last year and then maybe even a little early part of this year, but more so with last year, the stubbornness that we saw on offense and and persistence on running the ball, but doing the same things that didn't work can't be there. You had that issue last year. Okay, so you should learn from that issue now. You've got to be able to learn from that. You've got to be able to grow. You've got to be able to put your players in those situations in the best situations for them to succeed. And so I think it's going to be a really big week for Joe Sloan, for Cortez Hankton, for that offense in general, because when Brian Kelly talked about coaching, I think every coach on that defensive side of the ball started. He ain't talking to us, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was pretty obvious. It was
Yeah.
pretty obvious that the coaches on the defensive side of the ball, you know, they probably didn't have to go into work till a little bit later on Monday. You know,
Yeah.
Kelly probably, met with the offensive coaches for a little while before, but you know, those guys just, they've got to be able to match what you're seeing on defense,
Yeah.
and what you're seeing on defense right now, I think, is out of the norm. I mean, LSU's playing defense right now like it's in midseason form.
Yeah.
It did it against Clemson, it did against Louisiana Tech, and that's not easy to do, to come
Super
out and to
impressive.
be playing as one unit, that well into the system. So this offense still has a long way. It still has a lot of time to get things together, but you've got to show signs. You've got to show signs of growth. You've got to show signs of willingness. You've got to show signs that you trust your guys. And those are the things that I'm just really looking for this weekend, is saying, hey, we know these are our strengths, you know, so let's go out and let's play to our strengths.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that if Florida drops 8 DBs back, that you're just chunking the ball down the field.
Yeah.
You take what they give you, but you've got to test the limits too. You've
Yeah.
got to push them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really solid way of kind of wrapping up the offense here. I did want to touch on the defense before maybe we move on to our some a little bit recruiting stuff, and then also some predictions to round it out. But I think to your point defensively, like uh, I've been super impressed 2 weeks in just how clean this has looked. I mean, they didn't have a penalty on defense in that first game. They in the second game they forced 8 straight punts before they kind of allow, or I guess put some of their backups in the fourth quarter against Louisiana Tech, and they went down and scored in the fourth quarter. But before that drive, they had not even 100 yards of offense through 3.5 quarters. I mean, like they have been super dialed in on that side of the ball. And I do think that this matchup against Florida creates a little bit of a different challenge for them. I think DJ Lagway is one of my favorite quarterbacks in the conference and in the country. I think he's somebody that has immense talent with throwing the football, even more so than what we saw, I think, 2 weeks ago with Cade Klubnik. And I think the big thing that they're going to have to do, though, is, Lagway is not a guy that's going to want to look to run the ball a whole ton. I think he can. But he's going to be somebody that's very much like Garrett Nussmeier. He's thinking pass first, pass second. And I think that's going to present some interesting opportunities here for LSU's defense to, draw up some creative blitzes. I'm sure that Blake Baker's going to have some. I believe we've gotten some different words from LSU leaders in the first couple weeks of what that looks like, but I think what Weeks just said wrinkles this last week. I think there's going to be some wrinkles in the game plan for LSU in terms of blitzing and how they can have success against Lagway. But I think they have some experience, some good young wide receivers too, and Eugene Wilson and Ventrell Brown that are going to be interesting tests for this secondary. And I think really the big thing that you just want to continue over is the communication, because I think the communication at all levels has been flawless. I think that they've made all the right calls from a just front to back situation of this defense, and it's led to some really great success here. And I mean, you can't really nitpick anything that this defense hasn't done well. But this is going to be a real interesting game, I think, just for them in terms of showing that they can win and have success against all different types of offenses. And I think this Florida offense, while it did struggle last week against USF and didn't look very much in sync, I should say, that they have talent here, and I wouldn't put it past them to have some success in this game if LSU's not on top of their P's and Q's.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think the key is Harold Perkins. Harold Perkins has to play the type of game that he
Yeah,
played against Clemson. He can be disruptive like that. He can get after DJ Lagway, And we saw how effective he was against Klubnik, and so
If that
I
if
think
that
that
pressure if that pressure comes from the inside out too, like they have shown with McKinley and Gooden and Bro and those guys, I think it's going to be a really easy game plan for them if they can execute it, and it's going to be fun to watch. So, and with that, I just wanted to kind of pop it over to you with some recruiting stuff. Obviously, this is a massive game for LSU, in Saturday night in Death Valley. We've got a whole bunch of visitors that we've been posting throughout the week, some big names in 2026, 2027. Just kind of what can you tell us or tease about what to expect this weekend from a recruiting perspective as LSU really tries to, kind of get things rolling with 2027 and maybe pull off a few surprises in 2026 down the stretch.
yeah, they'll have a lot of Elijah Haven, the number one quarterback, number one prospect in the country from 2027 in Baton Rouge. He'll be at this game. Obviously, Florida's a major contender for him. I think they're probably the team to beat right now. Obviously, a lot's going to depend on their season, how that goes, and everything. But you get Lamar Brown back into town. Still expecting, but wouldn't be shocked if something crazy happened and Oregon commit Emmanuel Ahianacho. He's supposed to come in for this game right here, and I think he still will. But whenever you got a kid who's a 5-star committed to another school and stuff, you know, it only takes that school to ramp up the pressure a little bit, and you can
Yeah.
get some different opinions and some changing of opinions and decisions. But it's going to be a good list. Easton Royal, the 5-star receiver out of Brother Martin for 2027, he's going to make it up for his first game. Ahmad Hudson, the number one tight end in the country for 2027, a 5-star. He's going to make it in. I think KJ Edwards, the running back for 2026, who's committed to Texas A&M. Texas A&M. He's an interesting guy to keep an eye on with with Frank Wilson not having a running back in this class, with KJ Edwards really being the only guy that he's targeted. They've
Yeah.
stayed on the Aggie commit ever since he committed. So I really think that I really think that they have a legitimate chance to flip him. You start looking at some other guys. You go down the list. You've got your car guys. Excuse me. You've got your I can't remember and I can't recall right now if St. Aug plays on Saturday or not,
Hmm.
because they play a lot of Saturday games. So that could potentially, affect whether or not you get those two studs St. Aug receivers for 2027. You're able to get them on campus. I know they played last Saturday, so they weren't able to make it up for the Louisiana Tech game. JJ Bush, the Arkansas commit, the 4-star
Yeah.
linebacker out of Alabama. He's set to come in. Another guy that they would really love to flip. You've got Lamar Brown, who's going to be on campus, kind of the spokesperson for this class. And so,
Yeah, I think a couple other ones too. Guys that are out of state, right? Trenton Henderson and Deuce Gerald's, I believe, are going to try to make it in
yeah,
for this game as
yeah, yeah,
well.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I
Those
think
two
that's
commits are
important,
going to be coming
especially in
in.
Henderson's case, because I think Florida is probably one of those teams that's going to be pushing for the in-state kid down the stretch
Yeah,
here.
Florida would be the school that that if someone makes a strong run at Henderson between now and the early signing period, I think Florida would probably be that team that could give him something to think about.
Yeah.
Um, so getting him on campus, getting him in from Pensacola, I think is going to be good. So, what you feeling, man? How you feeling about this one? What's your prediction?
Yeah, I think LSU handles this thing pretty easily. I think this is going to be a double digit win. I got it kind of in that 31-20 range, 31-17 maybe. I have a lot of faith in this defense, and I have some cautious optimism that the offense can start getting it rolling here this weekend. Like I don't think you can take too much from a Clemson win. I don't think you can take everything from that performance last week against Louisiana Tech, where just everything felt off. I think that's the worst you'll see this offense play this year. That's my overarching prediction of this, I guess, as we go forward this year, is that I don't think this offense will play any worse than it did against Louisiana Tech, and they did it in a win. So I think that was something that the offensive players that we talked to on Tuesday kind of echoed as well, is that they know they didn't play well, they know there's lots of room to grow and improve, but they also won the game at the end of the day. So I think this offense get more vertical. I hope that they can hit a big play, whether it's to Chris Hilton or Nick Anderson, kind of keep Florida on its toes defensively. And if they can do that, I think they can get into the 30s. I think they can put up some good points and get out of there with a good, clean SEC opening win. What about you? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of look at this as kind of like a two-score game, like a two-touchdown game for LSU. I'm with you. I think the offense is going to really kind of start to open things up a little bit, kind of start to get going. I kind of go back and forth on whether or not the defense has a couple of hiccups, and Florida's maybe able to get this, maybe able to score a couple of touchdowns, a couple of field goals to get into the early 20s. But yeah, I think that I know yesterday I looked yesterday and the spread had dropped. It opened at 9.5 and it sat at 7.5. But then I think the over under dropped from 54.5 on Sunday to 48.5 it was yesterday. So I think they're going to go over, and I think LSU's going to cover, and I'm somewhere in that 34 to somewhere in that 34 to 13, 34 to 20 realm.
Yeah,
I really think that this is where we start to see things really start to kind of spiral downward
for
for Billy
Florida.
Napier.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I think
it's
this.
very possible.
I think the only person in South Louisiana who may be a little disappointed, and got to give my boy Double G Glenn Gilbo a shout out. Says
Uh,
all the villain says my
uh,
boy Glenn gets too
you
much
mentioned
heat
that
over
name. We're gonna have 20 comments. We're gonna have 20 comments underneath this podcast today on.
I love GG.
Yeah, we love Gilbo. Look, I think that's very reasonable to expect. I think LSU should really come out with a very clean performance, and if it's the team that we think it's going to be this year, they should be able to win this game, and I think win it pretty handily. So, we'll certainly wait and see what everything shows on Saturday, but we're very excited to get this one rolling. I think this is going to be a really fun SEC schedule for LSU, and you started off against a program that has always provided some fireworks, I think, over the years. This has been one of those really fun matchups over the years. I was talking to Jacob Hester at the Clemson game, and he was saying how Florida was always his favorite one to play as a player. And certainly growing up in that era, watching those games, that was one of my favorites too. So excited to get things
Made the
rolling
man
here.
who he is. Made the man who he is. Come on,
Yeah.
you know that dude loves the Gators.
Oh yeah, man.
Come
That
on, man. That put Jacob
iconic,
Hester in.
iconic
Yeah,
drive. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll get out of here, guys, and we'll be back later in the week to recap this game and talk things for next week. But for now, he's Sonny Ship. I'm Glenn West, and thanks for watching the Go 24/7 podcast.